Hello, this is Grisola Arriola, and this is my reflection on culture, ethnicity, and race for EDGR 595, Community of Learners at Concordia University. The first question we're going to answer is, how do the social identities impact me, my students, and my school? First, let's define social identity and its components. Saul McLeod states, social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on their group membership, and groups give us a sense of social identity, a sense of belonging into the social world. These are make up our self-image, which are composed of our culture, which is defined as behaviors and beliefs characteristic of a particular social, ethnic, or age group. It also makes part of our ethnicity, which is considered our ethnic group or a social group that we share a common and distinctive culture, religion, language, or such likes. And our race, which is a group of persons related by a common descent or heredity. Anthropology also defines race as a socially constructed category of identification based on physical characteristics, ancestry, historical affiliation, or a shared culture. As humans, we develop our sense of pride and self-esteem based on these aspects of our identity. So continuing with this question, how do the social identities impact me, my students, and my school? Well, I believe that when there's a lack of self-identity, there is a struggle to find our social identity. When there's a lack, according to Erik Erikson, he says that we develop a malignant tendency, which he calls repudiation. When we're looking for our self-identity and we don't have one, it affects all aspects of our life. It affects our family relationships when we're dealing with biculturalism because we have a clash of identity. It also affects our academic success based on those identities that we take on or don't take on. It also affects our future aspirations according to what identity we start developing, or our lack of social identity. Which future aspirations can we attain? It impacts my students because when they fail to form an identity, either self-identity or social identity, Erikson states that they may become involved in destructive activities because, as he quotes, after all, being bad or being nobody is better than not knowing who you are. Personally, it has impacted my life and personally and my professional life. I have had to face many struggles from the social identities given to me in the world. I've had to overcome stereotypes and fight for my own right to an education. As a teacher, I continue to fight these struggles, but for my students who are viewed as how I used to be, as unworthy or as unable to succeed, or simply misunderstood by those that don't understand the struggles that we have to face. Now a teacher, Ms. Peshang, talks about multicultural education. What poses a difficult for students and educators is that there is no cohesive awareness within the educational community on how to provide meaningfulness to the multicultural student of today. Now a teacher, she describes the struggles that she faced as a bicultural student in America. She states, "For the better part of my life, my identity has been clouded as I navigated and juggled the taboos and struggles of being bicultural in America. Growing up, I was confused about who I was, about who the Hmong people were as a people. These stories my parents told me about growing up in a peaceful country suddenly destroyed by war was unfathomable to me, but greatly influenced how I was raised. Throughout most of my life, I was made to believe that being bicultural was a handicap. I grew up in a time when the public school systems were just learning about Hmong people and how to serve these students with different needs. I remember the sense of urgency around having to learn English and the stigma of being an ESL student. It was important to learn the rules of the school and the ways to be at school because the life I knew was wrong. Since my parents knew nothing about this country, I had now to work twice as hard to face my challenges, only to be half as good as my peers." What assumptions do we make about people from different races, ethnicities, and cultures? Well, as humans, we make lots of assumptions. We make assumptions about their intelligence, their abilities, their willpower, their decisions that they're going to make, their futures, character traits, what their families are doing or not doing or must be like, even their likes and dislikes. We create stereotypes for every group of person we can imagine. And what this does, it just sets limitations on who they can be. What we need to do is we need to start deconstructing and educating ourselves to look beyond the stereotypes. Why is there a dichotomy where some students achieve and some do not? According to Erik Erikson, ego identity is knowing who you are and how you fit into the rest of society, taking all that you've learned about life and yourself and molding it into a unified self-image, one that your community finds meaningful. Ms. Pang describes being bicultural as being misunderstood again and again through her life because of the foods that she ate, the beliefs that she had, the values that she had, the choices that she had made, and the life that she lived. She had a clash between home life and school life because there were different sets of values and expectations at each. She reveals that she suffered through shame and embarrassment because of her culture, and she continuously lied to gain approval from friends and teachers out in society. These experiences, she claims, continue throughout her life, but has shaped her into the educator that she is today, able to help students that go through the same thing. Erikson considers the inability to understand one's role in society as role confusion. Given the diversity in the United States classrooms and the lack of a society that reinforces more than one culture effectively, we can conclude that the majority of students will face some type of role confusion, and they will face identity crisis throughout their lives. Let's talk about self-image. Research suggests that how students see themselves, as well as in any particular group in which they belong, in the context of their school and community, can influence their students' identity formation, values, feelings, and competency, relatedness, and goal setting. We saw this occur in Jane Elliott's classroom when they did the project as seen in the video, A Class Divided. You can see how students take on the roles depending on which group they were put in and what their expectation was. It is the importance of intentionally teaching students how to form positive identities and how it can impact the students' outcomes and successes in life is so critical. I believe that it's our insecurities that give life to viewing differences as a threat. St. Augustine states that the primal destruction of man was self-love, and there is no one who does not love himself. But it is one must search for the right type of love to avoid being warped. When we are unsure of our self-worth, we look to compare ourselves to others, but our self-love and preservation tend to become warped, as stated by St. Augustine. Instead of looking to others for traits that we can aspire to, we look to find those that can make them feel as insecure as we do. This prevents compassion because it would mean that accepting our own insecurities and imperfections are true. Hence, the failure to accept that we are not a perfect creature, as stated in Jay Smoot's video, the TED Talk, and acknowledgement of racism in such conversations is not capable. So why is it important to develop equity in our classroom? Let's talk about equity. Equity means taking needs into consideration. So we're talking about leveling the playing field. Well, it's important because, as Benedict Carey states, what we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, and how we feel emotionally and physically can contribute to the retention of information. In the video, A Class Divided, one little girl even revealed that she could not think of anything other than the dreaded collar the day that she had to wear it. Similarly, many of my students are so busy thinking of the collars that they wear, their labels, coding, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, and so on, that they cannot focus on anything else. So it's important to develop equity in the classroom because we can change their mindsets to those of attainable goals and accomplishments, and set up these students for success regardless of levels, deficiencies, and whatnot. We also teach them to honor our differences instead of see those as threats. In our society, students come to class sometimes with so many labels and stereotypes that they carry this heavy burden that they are unaware of. Instead, we need to learn to honor and accept and embrace our differences so that we can be successful and we can help our students be successful. And lastly, we need to empower our students. By developing equity in our classroom, we will empower our students to believe that they can succeed. And we can have students walk out of our classroom feeling empowered and competent. How will this perspective affect what I teach? Well, I teach AVID and ESL. The AVID program that I teach is catered to ESL students. By changing my perspective or accepting this perspective, it affects my teaching every day because I have students that I need to help figure out what they feel, how they feel, why they feel unmotivated, and how can they overcome these feelings in order to achieve in school and in the real world. AVID Excel, their curriculum is catered around student engagement, reading skills, writing skills, oral language, how they talk, and academic vocabulary. We also focus on study skills, such as Cornell notes, and we also talk about the most important, I think, is self-determination and leadership. How will it affect how I teach it? I think that this perspective affects in a positive way because I am very in tune to multicultural awareness in my class. I have a diverse class of Hispanics, Africans, Middle Eastern, Asian, and I even have some that are bicultural, more than that. So multicultural awareness helps me to teach my students to be accepting of their differences. We explicitly teach social awareness in our class. We talk about issues that exist that affect them. We debate about it. We interact with biased text, shows, TV, comments, internet. And it helps me to build the relational capacity where it allows my students to talk about these topics with me and truly hear their opinions and how they feel and what they believe. And it allows me to have them go through a reflective process and maybe change some of their own biases or their own questions of their own identity. I like to incorporate ethics lessons into my leadership and self-determination lessons because I think that building their character, if their self-identity is not yet strong, then maybe building some of those character traits can help build their leadership and their self-identity for the future. I also like to bring in different role models that are relatable to my students, along with guest speakers. So different role models could be in the literature, in videos, in any kind of way, and then bring in actual people in our own community that they can relate to and that they can look up to. I also like to talk about my own experiences and how I overcame my own struggle. These different types of discussions and the way I can teach it in my classroom set the tone for the diversity and community building that is essential to creating successful and well-balanced students. It opens their minds to different types of views that maybe they hadn't been exposed to. It also helps change their mindsets and understand their identity and deal with maybe insecurities that they have in healthy ways and positive ways. My goal is that by the end of the year, students walk out of my class feeling stronger about their identity and that they're less likely to compensate or feed into their negative emotions. I love teaching AVID and AVID Excel because our curriculum provides specific lessons about assumptions and impressions and perceptions, and their rationale reads as such. Assumption-driven prejudice should not be condoned and is not acceptable behavior, yet is still pervasive in today's world. Students need to be aware of how their decisions to adopt attitudes, behaviors, and other characteristics, fashion, dialects, conventions, etc., will impact how others, teachers, family, and friends, etc., may perceive them. For this reason, it is important for students to better understand others from other perspectives and appropriately advocate for themselves. Developing this social and self-awareness promotes the metacognition autonomy and personal responsibility that will in turn empower students to both take charge of how they are perceived and how to redefine the metrics by which people develop perception. I just love that I'm able to teach something, a class that teaches this specifically to children and empowers them and helps them to understand others and understand themselves more than just a regular lesson. So I feel very blessed in that aspect. And to conclude this discussion, I wanted to end on a note with Ms. Pang Zhang on multicultural education. She talks about how it is not just knowing about other cultures, which I think is a misconception. You think, oh, well, I've heard of these, some of their cultural traits and their traditions, but that's not the same thing as knowing multicultural education tactics and strategies. It's about inviting different truths other than your own into the classroom and accepting and validating identities and to a deeper extent. So here's this little video to close out my topic here about multicultural education.